And so this is Module 2 of the Bluebook Test 5, Reading and Writing. I take it that this is a harder Module 2, so we'll just get right into it here. Standard English, words in context. Mary so-and-so, a chemist who helped advanced home refrigerators, undoubtedly made a substantial impact on society, but her place in our historical memory is perhaps more something than that of this other person who invented Kevlar. Okay, if this person is going to be remembered for a long time, that means that her place, Mary Ingle Pennington's place, is more fleeting, is more tentative? I mean, I would not have thought of that, but warranted, no, means deserved, and this is saying that, no, she will long be remembered for this. So this is saying, although she undoubtedly made a substantial impact, her place is perhaps more tentative. It's not as strong as that of this other person who made this other, discovery or invention. To demonstrate that the integrity of underground metal pipes can be assessed without unearthing the pipes, this engineer and colleagues blanked the tendency of some metals' internal magnetic fields. They investigated it. No? They showed that such alterations can be measured from a distance and can reveal concentrations of stress in the pipes. Can't be A because you can't, that's not grammatical. Hypothesize the tendency. No. You hypothesize that something. So it can't be A. They discounted the tendency to alter under stress. No. I think it's going to be that they exploited it, but let's try it one more time. They can be assessed without unearthing the pipes. Yeah, they made use of the tendency of these internal fields to alter under stress. They showed that they can be measured from a distance, in other words, without unearthing the pipes. Yes, D. Despite the generalizations about human behavior they have produced, many studies of behavioral psychology have used highly unrepresentative subject pools. Students at the colleges and universities where the researchers are employed. So, in other words, they're trying to generalize about human behavior on the whole, but they're using subject pools that consist just of college students, so they don't represent humanity in general. So to correct this situation, it is necessary to actively recruit subjects from diverse backgrounds and locations. So to improve the situation, to ameliorate it. So to sanction something is either to support it or to penalize it. I know that seems weird, but sanction can mean either one of those things. To rationalize something, you're sort of making sense of it after the fact. You're explaining it. And then to postulate is a lot like to hypothesize. So ameliorate means fix or make better. And I'm realizing I'm getting some new words to possibly add to my master vocabulary list, my list of words to study. Here, we've got another one. So, though not closely related, the hedgehog tenrecs of Madagascar share basic traits with true hedgehogs. What are these? Including, so these are traits. These are, similarities. They share basic similarities with them. So even though they aren't closely related, they share basic similarities with them. They independently develop these traits, but the traits themselves are similar. Yeah, I don't think the hedgehogs share concerns. That would be funny. While recent scholarship has undermined claims that the works of 12th century Islamic philosopher so-and-so were they similar to, different from, something else? It is indisputable that his location meant that his works were primarily available thousands of miles west of the era's center of Islamic thought. Okay. So the recent scholarship has undermined claims that his works were more widely read, maybe? It is indisputable or imitated by. Okay, and why is this? Why would we say this? Because this indicates a contrast. Researchers undermine claims that his work, whatever we see in the first part, should contrast with the second part. So his location meant that his works were primarily available thousands of miles west. That means that his works were widely available. They were read by others. And again, maybe I can say something more about that one later, but time is ticking. And so let's keep on moving. So here we want to pay attention to the function of each sentence as we go, because function is important in these function passages. So Israel is a young man wandering through New England during the late 18th century. So he hired himself out for 3 months. At the end of that time, to receive for his wages, that's not correct grammar in current English. At the end of that time, to receive for his wages 200 acres of land lying in New Hampshire. It's strange. His employer proving false to the contract in the matter of the land, and there being no law in the country to force him to fulfill it. Okay, so this is a modifier. His employer proving false. These are like factors that influence maybe his behavior. Israel, I'm going to come back to the underlined portion. Israel was obliged to look around for other means of livelihood than clearing out a farm for himself. Okay. He wasn't able to make money. His employer didn't pay him. So this underlined portion is going to describe Israel, the person, who, however brave-hearted and even much of a daredevil upon a pinch, seems nevertheless to have evinced or evidenced a singular patience and mildness. So the underlined portion is describing Israel's personality traits, his character. I don't think A is right. It doesn't imply that he treasures a particular characteristic when that characteristic should usually be regarded as a flaw. I don't think so. He has a singular patience and mildness. And it doesn't even say that he treasures a particular characteristic. It suggests that if not for a certain aspect of his character, he might not have been as easily thwarted. No, I don't think he was thwarted in his ambition. It just says that he had the ambition. Yes, it's going to be D. It explains why, when the situation requires it, he is able to undertake courageous acts that others would generally avoid. And why is that? Because he was patient. He was patient. Even though he is brave and he is a daredevil, he is also patient. I'm gonna flag this one to come back to it because I'm not actually 100% sure, but where is the bookmark? Oh, right there. Okay, we're gonna come back to that. I think that's right. Okay, overall structure. So overall structure, I think of it's going to go from here to there. So think about 2 parts, from this to that. Changes to vegetation and other human activities influence carbon and nitrogen levels in soil, though how deep these effects extend is unclear. Hypothesizing that differences in land use lead to differences in carbon and nitrogen levels that are not restricted to the topsoil layer, this person sampled soils across multiple land use types within each of several Ethiopian locations. They found, okay, so it states something that's unknown, and then it describes an experiment and its findings that sort of answer that question. So A is not going to be correct because they don't refine the hypothesis. B? No, because let's see. Well, maybe B is an observation that conflicts with that hypothesis. They hypothesize that differences in land use lead to differences in carbon and nitrogen levels that are not restricted to the topsoil layer. Differences in land use lead to differences in carbon and nitrogen levels that are not restricted to the topsoil layer. Well, they found something that is comparably low levels. Oh, okay, yeah. Though. They found though. So this actually does suggest that it took a second to read and figure out that it does conflict with their hypothesis. So I think it is going to be B. It's not a process. There's definitely not competing hypotheses. And there's not a hypothesis that has been the subject of scientific debate. So an unresolved scientific question, a hypothesis, and then an observation made. So hey, here's one where it's got a 3-part answer. Usually there are 2-part answers on these questions, but this is good to know that sometimes they're going to vary things a little bit. Okay, how would the author of text 2 respond to the claim underlined in text 1? And so here we first want to make sure we understand this, but we don't want to just jump ahead. We'll read the whole 2 sentences. Okay, so efforts to automate classification of paintings into different artistic styles have had little success, and we have probably reached the technological limit of this work. Furthermore, it's not obvious that this is even a useful endeavor. Okay, but differences between artistic styles are inherently subjective and often not the best way to understand how relationships between works, but we want to focus on that. These efforts have had little success and probably won't get any better. Baroque painting used a very similar color palette as Renaissance painting did to depict largely the same subjects that Renaissance painting depicted. Automated artistic style classifiers often struggle to draw distinctions between these 2 styles, but these people were able to achieve a high degree of accuracy in these comparisons by running one classification model atop another, an approach that demonstrates how much innovation is possible. Okay, so they're going to disagree because it hasn't reached the technological limit, emphasizing that there are still advances being made. Yeah, so the authors of Passage 2 are not criticizing previous research. They're not arguing that people are not able to correctly identify the style of paintings. If anything, the author of Passage 1 is citing that sort of argument. And they're not saying this. So they're focusing on technological advances or advances in research. Okay, and so what I'm going to do here, we're getting into the inference. No, I'll go ahead and do this. At a certain point, I'll skip ahead, but here we'll keep moving. So we've got 17 minutes left, 18 minutes, 17 and a half. Okay, it can most reasonably be inferred from the text that the finding about the microorganism community composition. Okay, so why was the finding important? And we have to infer it. We have to read between the lines. Okay. The finding about the microorganism community composition. Okay, to understand how temperature change affects microorganism mediated, so cycling of soil nutrients that is carried out by microorganisms, sort of. These people collected plant soil cores in the mountains at elevations around 2,100 meters and transplanted them to elevations of to lower elevations where the average air temperature was warmer. Yes, because you go down and the temperature goes up, generally. Microorganism mediated nutrient cycling was accelerated in the transplanted cores. Crucially, microorganism community composition was unchanged, allowing them to attribute it to... Okay, so why was it important? If the fact that this was unchanged meant that it was like, it could be viewed as like a control, or not a control, but it's a variable that's not varying, so that the changes that did occur could be attributed to this other factor. Whereas if this had changed, it might have muddied the waters and made it unclear, oh, do we attribute it to temperature or do we attribute it to a different composition? So it allowed them to rule it out as a potential cause of the change. It ruled out a potential alternative explanation for the acceleration in this nutrient cycling. Yes, so be proactive on these inference questions. You don't see a lot of reasonably be inferred prompts on the digital SAT, but there you go. They're going to classify this as a central ideas and details question, even though it really is an inference question. Data to complete the statement. So what is the statement? To test whether a medication is effective, scientists compare outcomes for patients taking it and patients taking a placebo. Patients normally aren't told they're receiving a placebo, but a research team conducted a study to see if there might be a medical benefit to telling them. The team used various measures to evaluate participants, with higher ratings indicating greater well-being in each measure, compared to the mean ratings after 21 days for participants in the control group. The mean ratings for participants who were aware of taking a placebo. This is weird because usually the placebo is the control group, but here, okay, after 21 days, so this is after 21 days, the mean ratings, so all of these, they're higher. They're higher for patients who were aware they were taking a placebo. So it's not about variation within the category. So A is not making a relevant point, even if it's accurate. B is inaccurate because they're higher in all three. It's higher in all three: global improvement, severity, etc. And then C, that's completely inaccurate. That's like irrelevant and inaccurate because it's talking about the wrong column and it's not making a comparison between columns. So they were higher for all three measures, indicating greater overall well-being. Data to support the researcher's conclusion. So we'll read it and see what their conclusion is. So to investigate potential cognitive, like mental benefits of taking leave from work, researchers conducted a 6-month study of Australian university staff members who took no leave from work during the study, those who took 2 to 4 days of leave, and those who took 1 to 5 weeks of leave. Tests of attentiveness were administered to participants during the study at random for the no-leave staff. 1 week and for the rest, 1 week before their leave, 1 week following their return to work, and 1 week after the second test administration. So like for 2 to 4 days leave, this would be before, 1 week before their leave, 1 week following their return to work, and 1 week after the second test administration. And then for the 1 to 5 weeks leave, before their leave, a week after. Okay. After analyzing the results, the researchers concluded that longer leave times might not confer a greater cognitive benefit than shorter leave times do. Yes, because the thing decreased, the test score, their attentiveness decreased when they had a long leave, whereas it at least increased from before their leave to after. And the no leave is kind of the control group, and we also noticed that I think we want to compare the black and the light gray. Okay. In the second test administration, participants who took 2 to 4 days leave had higher average attentiveness scores. Okay, so A is making the wrong comparison. A is comparing no leave to 2 to 4 days leave. We want to compare 2 to 4 days leave to 1 to 5 days leave. So in the first test administration, and I'm going to really have to speed up, participants who took 2 to 4 days of leave had lower attentiveness scores than those who took 1 to 5 weeks of leave. That's inaccurate. Both the second participants who took 2 to 4 days leave had higher. Okay, so that's going to be accurate. And so here I'm going to skip ahead, do the standard English conventions questions, come back to those because time is ticking. Okay, 10:57. Okay, the Boston Saloon was one of the most popular African-American owned establishments in 19th century Nevada, created by William Brown. Yeah, so created by businessman so-and-so, the saloon was known to offer. Yeah. How do we classify that? Verb form, or it's not really a verb, it's a participle. I'll say more about it later if I can. This is going to be some kind of verb question, subject-verb agreement. Such objects, interruption, double interruption. The objects are depicted in exquisite detail by Vermeer, and Vermeer was a painter celebrated for his naturalism. So such objects reveal. So plural, plural. All three of these would pair with a singular subject, and that's very typical on subject-verb agreement questions. Okay, clear glass allows all light to pass through. Wax paper allows only some light to pass through. Okay, so we've got two independent clauses, each of which contains an interruption. But the thing that makes this an independent clause has got a subject and a verb. We've got two independent clauses. We don't have an option to put a comma and a conjunction, so we need the semicolon. Period would have also worked. Okay, another verb question, probably subject-verb agreement again. A concept of, okay, the idea that the various frameworks a person has internalized, the various frameworks underlie. So just like the previous one, we've got plural, and that's going to pair with the plural. All three of these would pair with a singular subject. Framework underlies, framework is underlying, framework has been underlying. Okay, first we're going to focus on the second sentence here, see what kind of punctuation we need. Only 5 of these dances are included in international ballroom dance competitions. That's an independent clause. What comes after it? Rumba, samba, chamba. Okay, that's a phrase. That's not an independent clause. So we don't want a semicolon. We want a colon. Time is ticking, so I'll say more about this one later. This would benefit from a lengthier explanation. But the main thing is we've got a setup and a payoff. And then the however is contrasting with the first sentence. It's setting up a contrast with the first sentence, but the list of dances is set up by the colon. Okay. For thousands of years, humans have used domesticated goats to clear land of unwanted vegetation. When it comes to their diets, goats are notoriously indiscriminate. Colon. They will devour all kinds of shrubs and weeds. So again, we've got the setup and the payoff. And I'll say more about this later as well, but time is ticking. Transition. She found that the snowpack was deepest at lower elevations. At higher elevations, in contrast, or on the other hand, because, yes, lower elevations, higher elevations. On the one hand, on the other hand, in contrast. According to Derviger's law, countries with single ballot majoritarian elections for single member districts tend to polarize into two-party systems in which dueling political parties consistently dominate the political system. Countries with proportional representation electoral systems tend to support multipartyism, under which, okay, so this is a contrast. And here is the first time I've ever seen conversely be used as a correct answer. And so I'm going to have to take back what I've said in previous videos about conversely. It can't be, they're not putting it in other words, they're not giving an example, and they're not talking about a sequence. And so I will make a separate video about conversely. A turtle shell appears external to the animal, projecting its body like armor. Blank, the shell is often incorrectly assumed to be an exoskeleton. Okay, it appears external to the animal. Because of that, it is incorrectly assumed to be an exoskeleton. a rigid outer casing. So it appears external to the animal, so it is incorrectly assumed. So hence, therefore, consequently. In retrospect, one of the lessons of the Human Genome Project is that a gene is affected by many factors, not the least of which is interactions with protein products of other genes. Okay. How does this relate? Rather than focusing on the human genome, efforts to better understand gene mutations have begun to consider the human proteome. Okay, so consequently, or accordingly, because of this lesson, they have made these changes. So they're not summarizing, they're not conceding, they're not giving an example. Emphasizes similarity. They both show African American figures in poses. Yep, similarity. And then which category most routine diplomatic correspondence belongs in. Most routine diplomatic correspondence is classified as confidential. Why? Because it is classified here. Yeah. So that's going to be that. And then we're going to go back to 12, 13, 14, and 15. And this is still going to be tough because there's only 439 left, but we'll be as quick as we can, and I might run out of time, in which case I'll do those after. Okay. Data to complete the text. It may seem that the optimal strategy for an animal pursuing prey or escaping predators is to move at maximal speed, but the energy expense of exploiting full speed capacity can disfavor such a strategy in escape context, as evidenced by the fact that the number of lizards by average percent of speed used when pursuing prey. Even in escape contexts, a lot of them aren't at full speed. Multiple lizard species move at an average of less than 90% of their maximal speed. That's what the x-axis is showing. Yep. Again, could say more about it later, but the clock is ticking, so that's going to be our answer there. Which quotation most effectively illustrates the claim? So the poem highlights an ambivalence toward poetry as the speaker acknowledges its merits while also expressing a sense of displeasure. So we need an answer choice that acknowledges the merits of poetry while also expressing a sense of displeasure. Nothing there. One must make a distinction when dragged down. That's not it. When poems become so derivative as to become unintelligible, the same that we do not admire what we cannot understand. I think it's going to have to be D. A sense of displeasure. Reading poetry with a perfect contempt for poetry, that's a sense of displeasure. There is, after all, in poetry, a place for the genuine. So D. We've got two more. This is going to be tough, but logically completing the text, follow the line of reasoning, identify the variables. So this creature is known for having an anomalously or unusually oversized head crest. Until an almost complete fossil skeleton was found in Brazil, paleontologists had been able to study only skull specimens, though it was presumed that, like others of this creature, its primary form of locomotion was powered flight. Examining the fuller skeleton, these researchers determined that it had long hind legs, short wings, and an unusually long neck, characteristics that, combined with the large crested head, would have made sustained flight difficult and walking upright relatively comfortable. Based on these findings, these teams suggest that it likely walked instead of flew. So not A. Yeah. It was presumed that the primary form of location was powered flight, but they think now that it walked more and flew less than previously thought. Logically completing the text again, so follow the line of reasoning, focus on the key variables. Some ethicists hold that the moral goodness of an individual's actions depends solely on whether the actions themselves are good, irrespective of the context in which they are carried out. This philosopher has shown that surviving works of Aztec philosophy express a very different view. He reveals that these works posit or put forth an ethical system in which an individual's actions are judged in light of how well they accord or agree with the individual's role of society and how well they contribute to the community. To the extent that these works are representative of Aztec thought, his analysis suggests that they view the moral goodness of an action in context as opposed to whether the actions themselves are good. The Aztecs would have disputed the idea that the morality can be assessed by appealing to standards of behavior that are independent of the individual's social circumstances. Yes, they would have disputed this notion that is laid out in the first sentence because to them the context does matter.